I didn't open the door that night, and if I had, I don't think I would be here telling this story, because what I heard was not just knocking. It was something far worse, something that didn't belong to the outside world at all, and the moment I understood where it was really coming from, it was already too late. My name is Daniel, and a few months ago I moved into a small, quiet house on the edge of town, the kind of place people choose when they want to be left alone, far from noise, far from people, far from everything. And at first it was exactly what I needed: silence during the day, silence during the night, just me and my thoughts, until slowly that silence began to feel different, like it wasn't empty anymore, like something else had started to exist inside it with me. Something I couldn't see, but somehow could feel, especially after midnight when the house would settle, and every small sound became too noticeable to ignore. Part 1. First night. The first time I heard it, it was 2:17 in the morning. I remember checking my phone immediately after because something about the sound didn't feel normal. It wasn't random like pipes or wood expanding. It was controlled, deliberate, 3 slow knocks that echoed through the hallway as if someone was standing right outside my front door. And at first I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the house making noise. But then it came again, exactly the same pattern. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like whoever or whatever was making that sound wanted me to notice it, wanted me to react. And I lay there frozen in my bed, staring into the darkness, listening carefully, hoping it would stop. But instead the silence stretched just long enough to make me question everything. And then it came again, louder this time, clearer, impossible to ignore. I finally forced myself to get up, my heart beating faster than it should have, and walked slowly toward the front door, each step making the old wooden floor creak under my weight, the sound echoing too loudly in the quiet house. And when I reached the door, I hesitated, staring at it like it was something alive, something waiting for me on the other side. Then I asked, "Who is it?" But no one answered, not even a sound, just silence, thick and unnatural. And after a few seconds I leaned forward and looked through the peephole, expecting to see at least someone standing there. Maybe a drunk person, maybe a mistake. But there was nothing, just the empty porch and darkness beyond it. No movement, no shadows, nothing at all. I stood there for nearly a minute, trying to process what I had just experienced. And eventually, against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and opened it slowly, the hinges making a faint noise as cold night air rushed inside. But the porch was completely empty, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there, just stillness. And that was the moment I should have closed the door and forgotten about it. But instead I stepped outside for a second, looking around, trying to find some logical explanation. And when I stepped back in and closed the door behind me, that's when I heard it again, but this time it wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from deeper inside the house, somewhere behind me. I didn't sleep much after that, not really, because once you hear something like that coming from inside your own house, your brain doesn't just let it go. It keeps replaying it over and over again, trying to make sense of it, trying to find something logical to hold on to. But there was nothing logical about what I heard. And even though I eventually lay back down, my eyes stayed open, fixed on the dark outline of my room, listening for any small movement, any sound that didn't belong. But the rest of the night passed in an uncomfortable silence that felt heavier than noise itself. And when morning finally came, everything looked normal again, almost too normal, like the house was pretending nothing had happened. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, maybe lack of sleep, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. And during the day I even laughed at it a little, telling myself I was overreacting, that old houses make strange noises all the time. But deep down I knew what I heard. I knew it wasn't random. It had a pattern, intention, and that thought stayed with me the entire day, quietly sitting in the back of my mind until night came again. The second night I told myself I would ignore it if it happened again. No getting up, no checking the door, no feeding into whatever fear my brain was creating. And for a while it worked. I stayed in bed scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, letting the hours pass until it was late enough that exhaustion started to take over. And just when I thought maybe it really was nothing, maybe it wouldn't happen again, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. This time I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, my entire body tense, pretending I hadn't heard it, but my heart immediately started racing, faster than before, because now I knew this wasn't a one-time thing, and the silence that followed felt like it was waiting for me, like something was testing me, watching to see what I would do. And when I didn't react, the knocking came again, slightly louder, slightly closer. And that's when something inside me shifted. Because it didn't sound like it was coming from the front door anymore. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway. I slowly turned my head toward my bedroom door, which was slightly open, just enough to see the darkness beyond it. And I stayed completely still, barely even breathing, listening as carefully as I could. And then it happened again, but this time there was no doubt about it. The sound came from inside the house, from somewhere just outside my room. 3 slow knocks against wood, not a doorbell, not a random noise, actual knocking like someone standing in my hallway, tapping on the wall or maybe another door. And I felt a cold wave run through my entire body, the kind of fear that doesn't come from imagination, but from instinct, something deep inside telling you that you are not alone. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it toward the door, the beam cutting through the darkness, but it didn't reach far enough to show the entire hallway, only a small portion of the wall and the floor. And for a moment everything was still again, completely silent, and I almost convinced myself it had stopped, that maybe it was over. But then I heard something new, something worse than the knocking, a faint dragging sound, like something moving slowly across the floor, just out of sight. And I felt my grip tighten around the phone as I sat up in bed, my eyes locked on that narrow gap in the doorway, waiting, expecting something to appear, something to move into the light, but nothing did. And somehow that made it even worse. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. I couldn't tell anymore. Time felt distorted, stretched thin by fear. And eventually the sound stopped completely, leaving behind a silence that felt unnatural, like the house itself was holding its breath. And I stayed there like that for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to even look away from the door, until exhaustion finally pulled me under and I fell into a restless, shallow sleep filled with half-formed thoughts and constant tension. And when I woke up the next morning, the first thing I noticed was that my bedroom door was no longer slightly open. It was wide open, and I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't left it that way. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain it away, because there's a difference between hearing something and seeing proof that something changed when you know you didn't touch it. And the open door was proof, simple but undeniable. And even though part of me still wanted to find a rational explanation, the larger part of me knew that whatever was happening inside that house wasn't normal. And more importantly, it wasn't random. It was getting closer, more direct, more intentional. Like something was slowly testing the limits of what I would tolerate before I broke. I spent that entire day thinking about it, replaying the events again and again, trying to figure out what to do next. And eventually I came to the only decision that made sense. If I couldn't trust my own perception, then I needed something that wouldn't lie, something objective, something that would show me the truth no matter how uncomfortable it was. So I went out and bought a small security camera. Nothing fancy, just something with motion detection and night vision. Something I could set up facing the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. Setting it up that evening felt strange, almost like I was preparing for something I didn't fully understand. But at the same time, it gave me a sense of control, like I was finally doing something instead of just waiting and reacting. And once it was in place, I tested it a few times, checking the angle, making sure it could clearly see the hallway and the door, and everything looked fine, normal, just an empty hallway with old wooden floors and plain walls. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that there was something about that space I wasn't seeing yet. That night I went to bed earlier than usual, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to be ready. I wanted to catch whatever was happening on camera. And as I lay there in the dark, my phone in my hand, the camera app open, I kept glancing at the live feed, watching the empty hallway, waiting for any kind of movement, any sign that something was there. But for a while nothing happened, everything remained still, quiet, almost peaceful in a way that felt misleading. Then sometime after 2 a.m., the notification came through, motion detected. My heart immediately started pounding as I opened the app and switched to the live view, my eyes scanning the screen, trying to understand what I was looking at. And at first it didn't make sense because the hallway looked empty, exactly like before. No visible movement, no person, nothing that should have triggered the camera. And I almost thought it was a glitch, a false alert, until I noticed something small, something easy to miss. The door at the end of the hallway, the one that led to the storage room, was slightly open, even though I was sure I had closed it earlier. I stared at the screen, trying to remember if I had left it like that, trying to convince myself it was just a mistake, but deep down I knew I hadn't. And as I kept watching, the door moved, very slowly. Just a few centimeters at first, barely noticeable, like it was being pushed from the inside. And my entire body went cold as I realized what I was seeing. Because there was no one there, nothing visible, no hand, no figure, just the door moving on its own, inch by inch. As if something on the other side was opening it carefully, deliberately, and I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly as I watched it happen in real time on my phone. And then the knocking started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside that room. I didn't move at first. I just sat there on my bed staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Because there is a moment when fear becomes something else, something heavier, something that doesn't let you react normally anymore. And watching that door slowly open by itself, while hearing the knocking come from inside that dark storage room, pushed me into that exact state, where your body wants to run but your mind is stuck trying to understand what is happening. And for a few long seconds I stayed frozen, listening to those 3 slow knocks repeating from inside the room on the other side of the hallway, each one spaced perfectly, controlled, intentional, like a signal: knock, 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 then silence, then again knock, knock, knock. It wasn't random noise, it wasn't pipes or wood or wind. It was something choosing to make that sound, something aware, something deliberate. And the worst part was that it wasn't hiding anymore, it wasn't distant. It was right there, just a few meters away from me, separated only by a thin wall and a dark hallway I could barely see past. And still I didn't move. I just kept watching through the camera like it was safer to experience it through a screen, like that distance somehow protected me. Even though deep down I knew it. The door on the camera feed stopped moving once it was halfway open, and for a moment everything went completely still again. No knocking, no movement, just the empty hallway and that dark gap leading into the storage room. And I remember thinking that maybe it was over. Maybe whatever was happening had stopped. Maybe I had just imagined the rest of it. But then something changed in the image. Something subtle at first, almost impossible to notice unless you were staring directly at it, which I was. The darkness inside the room wasn't uniform anymore. It shifted, not like a shadow moving because of light, but like something inside the darkness adjusting its position, something that didn't reflect light at all, something that absorbed it. And I leaned closer to my phone, my eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of the shape forming inside that black space. And that's when I saw it, a silhouette. Not fully visible, not clear, but enough to understand that it was not empty in there. Something was standing just beyond the doorway, tall, unnaturally still. Its outline slightly distorted, like it didn't match the proportions of a normal human body. And even though I couldn't see details, I felt it looking outward, toward the hallway, toward my room. My grip tightened around the phone as a cold pressure built in my chest. And I realized something that made everything worse. The camera wasn't just showing me what was happening. It was showing me where it was, exactly where it was, and that meant the only thing separating me from it was distance. A few steps through the hallway, nothing more. Then the knocking started again. But this time it was louder, closer. And it wasn't coming from the storage room anymore. It was coming from the hallway floor. Knock, knock, knock. A hollow wooden sound, like something striking the floor directly, right outside my bedroom. My head snapped toward the door instinctively, even though I didn't want to look, even though every part of me told me to stay still and pretend none of this was real. But I couldn't stop myself. And slowly, almost against my own will, I turned my gaze from the phone to the slightly open space of my doorway, the darkness beyond it thick and unmoving. And for a moment there was nothing, no movement, no shape, just silence stretching tight across the space between me and whatever was out there. Then I heard it, a faint dragging sound, closer than before, right outside my door. And without thinking, I looked back at the phone screen, desperate to see where it was now, desperate for some kind of reference, some kind of confirmation. But the hallway on the camera was empty again, completely empty, the storage room door still open, the darkness inside it unchanged, and the thing I had seen just seconds ago was gone, which meant only one thing: it wasn't in the hallway anymore. It was somewhere the camera couldn't see, somewhere closer. The knocking came again, this time directly against my bedroom door. 3 slow, deliberate taps that vibrated through the wood and into my chest. And I felt my entire body lock up as I stared at that door, my mind screaming at me not to respond, not to move, not to make a sound, because whatever was on the other side already knew I was there. Knock, knock, knock. A pause, then something I will never forget. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper coming through the door, distorted just enough to feel wrong, unnatural, like it didn't fully belong to a human throat. And yet the words were clear. Open the door. Blood went cold instantly, because I had never told anyone my name, not the neighbors, not anyone around here. And there was no possible way for someone outside that room to know it. And I sat there in complete silence, every instinct telling me that opening that door would be the last thing I ever did. The voice came again, softer this time, closer. I know you're there. Then nothing, no footsteps, no dragging, no knocking, just silence. But it wasn't empty anymore, because now I knew for sure it was standing right outside my door. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the door, completely frozen, not moving, not speaking, barely even breathing. Because once you hear something like that say your name from the other side of a thin piece of wood, your body stops functioning the way it's supposed to, everything slows down. Your thoughts become sharp but useless, and all you can focus on is the presence, the undeniable feeling that something is right there, separated from you by inches, waiting. The silence that followed the voice wasn't normal silence. It felt heavy, like pressure building in the air, like whatever was outside wasn't gone, it was listening, just as much as I was listening to it. And in that moment I understood something instinctively. It wasn't trying to break in. It didn't need to. It was waiting for me to let it in. I kept my eyes locked on the door, expecting it to move, expecting the handle to turn, expecting something to force its way through, but nothing happened. And somehow that made it worse, because the longer it stayed still, the more it felt like a test, like it was giving me time to make a decision, time to react. And my mind kept drifting back to the same terrifying thought. If it could move the storage room door, if it could walk through the hallway without being seen, if it could knock from inside the house, then what exactly was stopping it from opening my door on its own? The answer came slowly, not from logic, but from instinct, from the way everything had unfolded so far. The pattern, the control, the intention behind every sound, every movement. It didn't force anything. It didn't rush, it guided, it lured. It wanted a response, a reaction, and that meant one thing: the door wasn't a barrier for it. It was an invitation for me. My phone screen dimmed slightly in my hand, pulling my attention back to the camera feed, and I glanced down for a second, just long enough to check if the hallway was still empty. And it was, completely still, nothing moving, nothing visible. The storage room door still open in the background, like a dark mouth waiting to swallow light. And for a moment I almost convinced myself that maybe it had gone back there. Maybe it had left the door. Maybe I was overthinking it. But then something appeared on the screen that made my entire body go cold. A shadow, not in the hallway, closer. At the very edge of the camera's view, just outside the angle that captured my bedroom door, something dark moved slightly into frame, just enough to exist, just enough to prove it was still there. And I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't gone. It had never left. It had just moved to a place where I couldn't fully see it, where I had to imagine the rest, and that was far worse than seeing it clearly. Then the door in front of me creaked, just a little. Not opening fully, not violently, just a slow, almost gentle movement, like pressure being applied from the other side, testing it, and I instinctively leaned back, my entire body reacting before my mind could catch up, my hands tightening as I stared at the handle, watching it carefully, waiting for it to turn. It didn't. The door stopped moving after opening just a fraction, leaving a thin gap of darkness between me and whatever was outside. And for a second everything froze again, that unbearable stillness returning, stretching the moment into something almost unreal. And then from that small gap, from that narrow opening, something shifted. A shape. Not fully visible, not clear, but there. Something was on the other side of the door, close enough now that the darkness itself seemed thicker, heavier, like it had formed, like it was leaning toward me without fully crossing the threshold. And I couldn't look away, even though every part of me was screaming to run, to get out of the house, to escape. My body refused to move, locked in place by fear. Then I heard it again, right next to the gap, a whisper. "You opened it." Heart dropped because I knew I hadn't, but the door was no longer fully closed. And in that moment I realized the truth. It didn't matter who moved it. It didn't matter how small the gap was. In its logic, in whatever rules it followed, the door being open, even slightly, was enough. The shadow on my phone screen moved further into frame, slowly, deliberately. And at the same time, the darkness in the gap of my door shifted forward just a little more, like something leaning in, like something preparing to cross over from one side to the other. And that was the breaking point. The moment my body finally reacted, not out of courage, not out of control, but out of pure survival instinct. I threw myself off the bed and rushed forward, slamming the door shut with all the force I had, the sound echoing through the house as I immediately locked it. My hands shaking so badly I almost missed the latch. For a second, nothing happened. Then the knocking exploded, not slow anymore, not controlled, but rapid, aggressive, slamming against the door over and over again, shaking it in its frame, each impact sending vibrations through the wood and into my arms as I pressed against it from the inside, holding it shut, as if my weight alone could keep whatever was on the other side from forcing its way in. The voice came back, no longer soft, no longer distant. Angry, distorted, open it. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head, whispering no under my breath over and over again. Even though I knew it didn't need to hear me, it already knew my answer, and the pounding continued for what felt like forever, until suddenly, without warning, it stopped. Completely silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong, that feels like something has ended, not paused. And I stayed there pressed against the door, not moving, not trusting it, waiting for the next sound, the next knock, the next whisper, but nothing came. And eventually, slowly, I opened my eyes and looked down at my phone again. The camera feed was still running. The hallway was empty. The storage room door was closed, exactly the way it had been before all of this started. And in that moment, I understood something that made everything worse than before. Whatever had been outside my door was no longer there, which meant it wasn't in the hallway anymore, and it wasn't in the storage room. So there was only one place left it could be, inside. I didn't move for a long time after that. I just stood there in the middle of my room, trying to understand what that realization meant, because it wasn't just fear anymore. It was something deeper, something colder, the kind of understanding that doesn't come with panic, but with certainty. And the certainty was simple. If it wasn't outside, then it had already crossed the only boundary that mattered, and I had no idea when it happened, or how long it had been there. The house felt different after that, not loud, not chaotic, but occupied, like the silence itself had weight now, like every corner held something unseen. And even though I turned on every light, even though I checked every room, every door, every possible place a person could hide, I found nothing, no sign, no evidence, just the same empty house. But it didn't feel empty anymore, and that was enough to know I wasn't alone. I left that house before sunrise. I didn't pack much, just the essentials, and I didn't look back when I stepped outside. because something inside me knew that if I did, I might see something I wouldn't be able to forget. Something standing behind one of those windows, watching me leave, or worse, something standing right behind me without me realizing it. And even now, weeks later, I still don't feel completely safe. Because sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and still, I hear it again, 3 slow knocks, not on a door, not on a wall, but from somewhere much closer.